One of the biggest debates on the global political agenda is the question of Hamas and its role, if any, it should have in a future solution for Palestine. Deemed a terrorist organisation by Israel, the US and UK and a few other nations who have all called for it to be eliminated and refused to consider it as a partner of any future solution for Palestine, as we have often recently heard repeated.
Victory is within reach, and you can't have victory until you eliminate Hamas.
Hamas, on the other hand, is a terrorist organization. They keep spreading anti-Semitism through their propaganda.
We must eliminate Hamas.
Hamas needs to be eliminated from Gaza.
But is this a fair judgment, considering historically other alleged terrorist groups have not been eliminated, but rather been brought into the fold of legitimacy by their own people and world governments? Let's take a look at just a few of the most famous and recent examples, as this might allow us to better understand the role, if any, Hamas might play in a future Palestinian state. Firstly, let's look at the ANC, the African National Congress. This was a group founded in 1912 in South Africa to advocate for the rights of black South Africans. By 1948, their central goal was to fight against the institutionalised apartheid that the government at that time was waging against them. But here's what happened. And please, contrast this story with what's happening in Palestine today. 1960 came along, and this group that called themselves a liberation movement, a group that was fighting for their rights against a racist regime, were banned. Many of their leaders were imprisoned and forced into exile, including their most famous prisoner, Nelson Mandela.
There are many people who feel that the reaction of the government to our stay at home, ordering a general mobilization, arming the white community, arresting 10,000s of Africans, the show of force throughout the country, notwithstanding our clear declaration that this campaign is being run on peaceful and non-violent lines, close a chapter as far as our methods of political struggle are concerned.
What is more interesting is that South Africa, the United States and the UK all declared the ANC a terrorist organisation. Ring any bells? But this didn't stop the ANC, which held firmly to its stance of seeking liberation, equality and rights for all black South Africans. We all know apartheid ended in 1990 in South Africa. Mandela was released that same year and the ANC's ban was repealed. 4 years later, free and fair elections were held and the ANC won, making it a legitimate political party. Mandela was elected the president of the new Democratic Republic of South Africa. So the group that was declared a terrorist organisation, that was banned, became an official political party that has turned the tide today and waged its own legal case of apartheid against the Israeli government. On a side note, did you know that the US government had Mandela on a terrorist watch list until 2008? Interesting. Huh?
Nelson Mandela continues to be included on the United States terrorist watch list due to his leadership and participation with the African National Congress.
The ANC is not the only example. Take a look at the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, that sought to end British rule in Northern Ireland and achieve reunification, and fought a bloody war for 30 years. This entity was declared a terrorist organisation by both the UK and the Republic of Ireland. But in 1997, it declared a ceasefire, decommissioned its weapons and only kept its political wing, Sinn Féin, which has become so successful that it won the most seats in the 2022 elections.
The word terrorist is a label used on many occasions by governments to demonise those who dare to stand against them. In our situation in Ireland, I was labelled a terrorist. The organisation that I was part of, the IRA, was labelled a terrorist organisation. We need to get behind the labels, and we need to address the issues that cause people to turn to violence in order to achieve political objectives. George Washington was described as a terrorist. Margaret Thatcher described Nelson Mandela as a terrorist.
This should provide us with valuable precedent that world leaders should be referring to when analysing Hamas and its role in a future Palestine. Because maybe, just like the IRA, a formally declared terrorist group became a popular and powerful political party, so too can Hamas. Then there's, of course, FARC in Colombia, an armed force founded in 1966 that signed a ceasefire accord in 2016, 50 years later, and became a legal political party. Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, released a statement saying, "Today's revocation of FARC's terrorist designations is a credit to the 2016 peace accord with the Colombian government." All these examples highlight one thing. Former terror organisations can merge into political parties and successfully participate in a country's elections. Perhaps the US and Israel should shift their rhetoric. Instead of eliminating Hamas, why not create the conditions for it to be an internationally accepted Palestinian political party? As George Galloway recently stated, it should be up to the Palestinian people to decide their leaders, not external players with vested interests and their own agendas.
Do I think that Hamas should be allowed to govern Gaza? Should we ask Britain to decide who runs Gaza, or the BBC, perhaps? The people of Palestine must pick their own governments.
But before we end, let's look at one more example. One that exists in the Israeli government today. We've all heard of Israel's far-right government. You know, people like Ben Gvir. Now, what gets hidden is the party that this guy comes from. Ben Gvir is part of a party called Otzma Yehudit, a descendant of the Kash party, which was barred from elections and declared a terrorist organisation by Canada, the predecessor to the EU, and the United States, but more importantly, by Israel itself. Just take a look at this article by the Times of Israel inquiring about whether Ben Gvir is a Kahanist, a word used to describe the ideology of the Kash party. The question, is Otzma Yehudit leader Itamar Ben Gvir now running for Knesset as part of the religious Zionism slate a full-blown Kahanist or something less extreme? If the descendant of a former Israeli-declared terrorist organisation can be in politics today, why do we exclude this option for Hamas? Now, this is not to support Hamas's ideology, but it's to apply a similar rule that was applied to those before, not to apply double standards, which we have seen time and time again when it comes to Palestine. So let's just pause and think with me for a moment. If we don't buy into the logic of the West and Israel, that no solution for Palestine is possible whilst Hamas exists, and instead consider the historic precedent laid out above, like with the ANC, IRA and FARC, and we accept Hamas as a potential legitimate political player, but importantly, we change the conditions the Palestinians are living under, end apartheid, end oppression, and end violence, then armed resistance would no longer be necessary. Then Hamas would not be a threat to Israel because Israel would no longer be a threat to the Palestinians. This would then pave the way for Hamas to become a legitimate political party and would have to contest elections along with every other Palestinian political party. It's a real and fair solution. We just need to create the conditions for it to occur.